Kiss of Death by Neon Zangetsu, Chapter 2, Kiss of Hope, Part 3. And that's the final plank. Naruto leaned back, tucked the hammer into his belt, and surveyed his work. It was crude, shoddy at best, but he didn't mind. Even in his first life, he'd never been the best craftsman. The patchwork Pat's job would hold until the roof started to leak again. He was sure it would a few years down the line. Also fine. He'd patch that too. A carpenter he would never be, but he knew how to use a hammer. There we go, he grunted, pushing himself to his feet. That should fix the leak. Wiping a bead of sweat from his brow, he leaped off the roof in a graceful arc. From there he landed nimbly in the grass on bended knee and shoved himself upright once more. His joints protested at the sudden movement with a jolt of pain. He ignored them as he always did. Show off! Kurama uttered a jaw-popping yawn. Was there really any need for that many backflips? Maybe he was. Then again, he had a good reason to be. After decades of wandering, he finally convinced Salem to settle down. Well, inasmuch as someone like her could settle down, theirs was a homely little cottage in the woods. Nothing more. Simple, even. Simple was good. Naruto liked it simple. Even if humanity returned one day, they'd think twice before hunting in grim-infested woods, and if they did, well, he still had the staff for good reason. Sauntering up the steps, he spied a hulking dark shape lurking near the porch. Not on it, not any more. She'd grown far too big for that. A massive head rose from giant paws to regard him with baleful red eyes. "Don't worry, Luna," he cooed at the beowulf. "It's only me." The dread wolf hummed once and laid her muzzle down, content to return to her slumber. Naruto took a moment to marvel at her. Really, she just kept growing. She was almost double the size she'd been when they'd first met, with no sign of slowing down. Just how big was she going to get? Not his concern. Shrugging, he swung the door open and strode inside, grinning from ear to ear. "Hey, Salem!" he called. "I fixed the roof." His words trailed off as he saw the love of his life. She wasn't in any shape to answer, though he supposed that one was her fault, not his. He found her sprawled gracefully on the couch near the hearth, fast asleep. She did not toss, she did not turn, didn't make a sound wave of her own even breathing. She was still and at peace with the world. He couldn't remember ever seeing her like this. She'd woken up screaming more than once before, and he'd always had to rock her back to sleep. Yet now, Naruto's jaw clicked open. "Well, I'll be damned," he whispered. "No nightmares." Tiptoeing forward carefully not to be heard, he reached out and pulled a nearby cover over her. She muttered something in her sleep and rolled over, bundling up among the thick fabric. It was so adorable, so utterly out of character for her, that he nearly laughed, but he knew that would wake her, and he couldn't bear to do such. Instead, he unbent enough to pat her head. Her pale hand clutched at him before he could pull away, proving grabby in her sleep. "Please don't go." He smiled. "I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart." She didn't seem to hear. "Don't leave." A strange feeling bubbled up in his chest. It felt like dread. Why? They were safe, they were happy, nothing could hurt them. Stamping it down, the blonde squeezed her hand until she released his. For a moment he found himself tempted to carry her to bed, but thought better of it. Salem looked too comfortable where she was, and he didn't want to risk rousing her. An almighty thunderclap rattled the world, causing Naruto to round on the sound. "What in blazes?" Beneath him, Salem didn't wake. Good. She needed her rest. With a final look and lingering kiss on her forehead, Naruto went to investigate, tugging his coat off the rack once more. The whiskered warrior snatched up his staff and strutted outward. A sudden impulse told him to lock the door behind him, and so he did. It seemed like a flimsy gesture, but it helped to even out his pulse. He had a bad feeling about this. High above the clouds swirled ominously that once clear blue sky, glowing darker with each passing moment. The wind began to pick up, creaking through the trees. A low peal of thunder reverberated overhead, and he squinted in its direction. eyes narrowing in search of the source. Luna stirred behind him, hackles up. The very earth shook as she rose up and padded forward. A low growl rattled his ears. Calm down, he sighed. There's nothing out there. It's just thunder. A bolt of lightning shot towards the house. Naruto came and raised his staff to intercept. Pain crackled up his arms as every muscle in his body locked down, but he grit his teeth against it and swatted it into the earth, tearing a deep furrow against the soil. It kept going, carving a terrible scar into the dirt. He paid the earth the wound no mind. His attention was already elsewhere. "That's enough of that!" he barked up at the clouds. "Whoever you are, I can sense you up there. Get down here!" A swirl of golden mist answered him, and quite suddenly he stood before a god. "Guard the house, girl." Naruto strode forward to meet him. He still shot a quick thought inward. "Kurama?" "Hmm?" His partner stirred. "You with me?" "Always." "Good." He gulped, gazing up at the luminescent beam. "Because something tells me I'm going to need you in a second." The god of light returned to Remnant on a whim. It wasn't anger that heralded his arrival, nor guilt, but something else altogether. Curiosity, some might call it, perhaps even boredom on his part. He sensed that the lonely girl in the tower still existed, but that she had yet to repent for her sins. His intent had been to simply peer in on her, to see why she still clung to her stubborn tenacity. Then he saw the house, and all that changed. She wanted to have a life here, did she? Unacceptable. Her immortality was a curse, not a blessing. She was not meant to live out the rest of her days in peace. Her existence was meant to be bitter and brief, allowing her to reflect upon her mistakes before she returned to the cycle of life and death. In a rare fit of pique, he flung a bolt of lightning at the house, only to find it blocked. Curious. "That's enough of that!" Someone balked up at the clouds. "Whoever you are, I can sense you up there. Get down here!" A voice called to him below, and he decided to indulge his curiosity. Had his brother missed some of the mortals after all? He'd been in a right state when he laid waste to this world. Perhaps he'd not been as thorough as he believed himself to be. How wrong he was! When he drifted down to grace the mortal with his splendor, he knew at once that this one did not hail from this world. His body burned with an inner fire, one the god could not recognize. Not magic, but something else. Strange. It almost felt as if another pair of eyes were gazing back at him through those ice blue orbs. "And who are you?" he asked. "Someone who wants to keep her safe," came the grunt. "That about sums it up." A disbelieving noise rose in the god's throat. It might have been laughter. He wasn't sure. "You protect her?" What nonsense was this? Salem's exile was no exile at all if she had someone to share it with. What good was such a punishment? Nay, it was not a punishment at all. How could she possibly be allowed to learn from her mistakes? He'd thought to return the barest vestiges of humanity to the world once she fell in despair and repented, but this was simply unacceptable. Life would indeed return to this world one day, but not like this. This would not do, not at all. You have been deceived, mortal. Truth was his greatest weapon. Even after all these years, the god of light wielded it like a sword. She is responsible for the destruction of this world. It is by her hand that humanity perished so long ago. Do you think her a victim in this? I assure you she is not. She is the cause of the devastation you see. And the god of light blinked. Pardon? What of it? The mortal shrugged. "We've all got skeletons in our closet. We all make mistakes. She clearly regrets hers, so what if she's immortal?" Another shrug followed the first. "I'll still be there for her. She can't die, you say?" A third shrug. "I'll do something about that too. Unlike you, I keep my promises." That stung a little more than it should. The god of light blinked again and tried another avenue of attack. "You are an aberration. You should not be here." Of course, he expected the mortal to bow and thank him for his most generous offer. "I would send you back to your world." He did not receive it. "Nope." A pause. "No? My home is here now, your godliness, and keep your voice down." The whiskered warrior flicked a hand at him for silence. "You're going to wake Salem. She finally fell asleep, and she's not having a nightmare for once. Do you have any idea how many years that took?" "Nightmares?" The god of light inclined his head to regard the humble cottage behind the blonde. If the girl from the lonely tower was still suffering after all this time, then that implied she felt guilt for her actions. Perhaps he should simply return her to the cycle of life and death. With her gone, this anomaly would have no reason to dwell in this world any longer. That would be best for all parties. Certainly. A staff slapped his chest, forcing him to halt mid-stride. "You'll be leaving her alone." The god of light drew back with a silent scowl. His face could not show such impudence. "You would defy your god?" Funny thing that Naruto's smile was just the wrong shade of vicious. "You're not my god. Never have been, never will be. Deal with it." "What is a mortal to a god?" Said Mortal lifted his chin. "What is a god to a non-believer?" In a whirl of radiance the god of light changed his shape once more. His body gained mass and formed where there had been none before. Golden coils of scaled light unfolded in a heartbeat. Light burst from very pore of his being as his jaw lengthened, the horns upon his head growing wicked and sharp. Within moments he ceased to resemble human at all and became a beast unparalleled. Great golden whiskers hung from a maw filled with terrible teeth that parted now to speak. "Do you believe me now?" he asked. "No." The young man deadpanned. "Oh, look, a dragon. Is that supposed to scare me?" "Listen to me very carefully," said Dragon, reared back, coils writing and twisting like some hidden snake. "I will only say this once. Do not mistake will in some semblance of my brother's power for our true might. Immortality or not, I am still a god, and you?" A peal of almighty thunder echoed through the skies above, resonating with his words. "You are a tin man in a lightning storm. Allow me to offer a rebuttal." Naruto raised his staff. "I'm not a tin man. I'm a lightning rod. Let your storm come." "I do not wish to kill you." Such recklessness, such temerity. Truly, the arrogance of these mortals knew no bounds. "Let me through. This is your final warning." The staff came down. "You cannot pass," he declared. "And who are you to claim such a thing, mortal?" "My name is Uzumaki Naruto." Said mortal stood fast beneath the weight of his gaze. "I am a shinobi from the Hidden Leaf Village, host of the Nine-Tailed Fox, protector of the innocent, devourer of gods." He seemed almost ashamed to admit that last part. "I say again, you shall not pass. Cross that line in the sand at your own peril." A lone finger rose to assess him. "But know that if you do, if you take that faithful step forwards into my domain, if you even think of hurting Salem," his staff struck the earth, splintering it in a single strike, "you're gonna regret it." The god of light twitched. Enough of this. He'd given this fool countless chances to step aside, even offered to return him to his rightful place. Yet he continued to defy him, and so too did his patience grow thin. He would remove this impudent pup, then return the lonely girl to the cycle of life and death once more. I would be made well. This farce would never bear repeating. He and his brother would return to this world and remake it as it was meant to be, and they would never suffer such rebellion again. As you wish." His head bowed. "I will end your life painlessly." A vicious crack howled through the air as a bolt of lightning lanced from heaven to earth faster than the naked eye could comprehend. There was no warning behind that. Nay, even that noise alone was more illusion than any real afterthought. It was a swift, singular strike, the wrath of a mighty deity, made manifest in but a single breath. Blue eyes rose to meet it. Death came with a thunderclap, and someone shouted back, "You shall not pass!" Naruto caught it. Rather than dodge or evade or even block like any sane mortal would, the blonde planted his feet, cast his staff aside, and took it head on. Bare feet bit into the dirt as he skidded back 9 paces. Sparks skittered across his form. A single grunt of pain was all he gave, nothing more, nothing less. Azure orbs narrowed up, framing a wild grin within. In a single seamless movement, he stomped down, swept his arms low in a sweeping stance across the lower part of his torso, pressed the two fingers together, and the god of life stiffened. A pang of dread overtook him. No, surely not. Ha! Krang, a sharp bark of triumphantly manic laughter burst into the air as the mortal flung the god's own lightning back in his face. Caught wholly unaware, the god of light tried to evade, but it was too late. For his folly he took his own blast dead in the chest. It bored a terrible hole through his serpentine form, and smote him from the skies as surely as a falling star. To his credit, the startled god tried to right himself. He tried to recover his lost momentum, tried to do anything other than fall. He did not succeed. What he did was topple out of the sky, squawking a startled crow, hitting every single branch on the way down. The trees were a cruel mistress, the ground a harsh taskmaster. It showed him no mercy, and the mortal— hold just a moment. Where had the mortal gone? He'd been standing there only a second before. Wait! A kick slammed into his mighty skull, sending his world spinning. Never mind, he'd found the mortal. At first the god of light didn't sense the coming danger at all. Indeed, he couldn't even begin to comprehend the very concept of such danger. What could possibly hurt him beyond his own power? He could heal quickly from this and not make such a mistake again. For all his claims to power, the mortal could not kill him. He knew this. He simply made a mistake. That was all. Foolishness, he growled. A miracle can only occur once. That opinion changed when said mortal flashed into existence directly before his right iris. For a fleeting moment the god of light glimpsed a terrifying visage boring into his own. Only then did he realize his peril. Too close, far too close. All of his instincts, the very fiber of his being, howled at him to move. Yet fear paralyzed him. He couldn't move. If a miracle only happens once, the cheeky mortal leered at him, then what'd you call it the second time? Anger broke through the fear, and the mighty dragon sought to rear back and use his jaws against this sudden threat, only for a gleaming golden hand to grasp one of his long whiskers. A swift tug yanked him back to the ground, stunning him once more. The mortal stamped down on his snout, pinning him in place before he could thrash his way to safety. A strange sneezing shriek filled the air, and for the life of him, the god of light couldn't place its origin. Hold on. Now he saw a light. Walk towards it! Naruto rammed the raw Centurion through his right eye, and for the first time since he'd come to be, the god of light cried out in pain. The sheer force of the jutsu crunched against his skull, obliterating one of his horns and eviscerating his lower jaw as it bore him down in the ground. 1,000 tiny blades tore at his scaled visage, ripping and tearing like countless hungry mouths eager for blood. Make it stop! Make it stop! Make it stop! There was no thought, no rhyme, no reason, only endless torment. He couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't breathe. Tried to push it away with his claws, only made it worse, for the attack tore at them as well, dragging them into the vortex of despair with merciless intent. Quite suddenly it was over, leaving the god of life trapped in a crater of his own making, a deity reduced to a quivering wreck upon the forest floor, wishing for death. Death would be a mercy compared to this. Writhing in pain, the fallen god could do naught but revert to his true humanoid form and try to recover, left wasted and gasping for air as his wounds struggled to heal. He was eternal, everlasting. An attack such as this would not kill him. That wasn't to say it didn't hurt, however. It did, immeasurably so. Agony filled every cell of light that made up his body. That attack was made for the sole purpose of taking lives. There could be no other cause for such a destructive thing. Ow! An angry hiss greeted him, and he dared to look up to see his tormentor waving a ruined arm. That hurts! Suppose that's what I get for letting my temper get the better of me and not throwing the damn thing. As he looked on, the man's ravished right arm began to heal, fresh pink skin overtaking scarred tissue. Within moments the injury ceased to be in its entirety. Impossible, he rasped. How can? What are you? I told you, I devour gods. Slim's shoulders rose and fell in a shrug as he flexed his restored fingers. As to that little trick with the lightning, well, the mortal gave him a wink. What can I say? A few decades gives a man time to practice. I may not quite have the almighty cosmic power bit down yet, but I'm getting there. The god of light tried to rise. A booted foot stomped down again, trapping his skull where it lay. Ah ah ah! The mortal, Naruto, tusked at him, waving one finger. You're not going anywhere. Let's have a chat. Unseen eyes narrowed. We have nothing to speak of. I think we do. Those slitted eyes narrowed to vicious slits. Lift the curse from Salem. No, I wasn't asking. A fresh Russian shuriken snarled to life in the blonde's palm. Lift it now. You misunderstand. I cannot. It was the truth after all. What need had he to lie? The truth would bring this impudent mortal more pain than any falsehood. She was cursed by both my brother and I together, and only through our power together may the curse be lifted. No amount of pain can make me perform an act that is beyond me. You have a brother. Red Eyes blinked in surprise. Call him, then. I'll knock some sense into him, too. The god of light knew he could. How he could send out a call to his younger sibling at this very moment, summon him here to this world once more. It was the right beneath him as elder, but that would mean giving in to this mortal, granting him what he wanted, doing his bidding. It would mean they were wrong to curse that woman in the first place, that wretched little witch who dared to trick them. He had thought to return her to the cycle of life and death, but now, after the beating he'd taken, he felt no such charity. No, he refused. This arrogant oaf deserved to be miserable. He would not call his brother here, because if he lost to this mortal, the god of darkness might yet be swayed. My brother is not so foolish as you might think. He will have seen our fight and will stay away. He relished the look of despair that flashed across the blonde's face before he mastered himself. Salem must understand the importance of life and death. Only then will she be released. Release! Naruto kicked him. She already does, you twit. Can't you see that? She does not. The god of light snarled. She never will. The sphere slowly guttered out in the mortal's palm. Then I'll find a way to lift the curse myself. Foolishness again. You cannot. Funny. They told me I couldn't be a shinobi. Wild eyes locked on him, bearing with cold intent. They told me I couldn't beat a goddess either. I did both of those things. Why not break a curse and go 3 for 3? Such arrogance. I cannot die. I am eternal. Maybe so. A blonde brow rose. But right now, you're weaker than you've ever been. Haven't you noticed? The god of light turned his attention inward. His injuries had been slow to heal. Even now he hadn't fully recovered from that last attack. His might and majesty were still very present, yet now that he knew what to look for, he noticed it. Everything felt dimmer, somehow, as though someone had cast a shadow over his very being. Surely that technique couldn't have damaged him this much. No, the word was a hiss. Yep! Naruto smacked his lips with a resounding pop. The Rasen Shuriken is a nasty piece of work, isn't it? My jutsu was made to target the cells of whoever it hits. Guess gods have those too. How long will it take you to recover from this? Years, decades, centuries? A wordless snarl greeted him. What's wrong? Cat got your tongue? You are unwise. To lower your defenses. Fury consumed the god of light as he buckled the blonde's boot, unaware, and transformed into a second swirl of holy radiance. For a moment the mortal reared back in surprise, blue eyes bulging. In that moment, draconic jaws closing around him with a terrible crunch. It was a brutal end for a brutal warrior. Content in his victory, the god of light turned to regard Salem's cottage and the lone Beowulf guarding it. Thump! He stilled. Thump! Thump! This wasn't possible. Thump! Thump! That fool couldn't possibly. The god of light felt his teeth crack. A heartbeat later, as a pair of giant hands forced themselves between his scissors, something impossibly large pushed his mouth open, inch by agonizing inch, a wrenching bone and sinew entwined. A low growl rose in his ears. It did not belong to him. With each passing moment it grew louder, and so too did his strength wane. No, 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 this could not be. It mustn't be. Impudent mortal, he cried, a panic overtaking him. Why won't you die? He exhaled in a mighty torrent of death. bathing the fool, hiding in his mouth with napalm. It wasn't enough. His jaws continued to part. Fire burst from his maw to set the very trees alight. The pain did not abate. Still he roared. It only grew worse. Still he spat flame and fury, thrashing against the forest floor. Yet his torment did not end. Why? Because I made a promise. Something latched onto his tongue, and the fire within cut off in a gurgle as golden hands locked around the offending tissue. The god of light had mere moments to comprehend this his peril, to actually consider begging for mercy. He never had the chance to give voice those words, for his foe tore it free from his maw. By then he was too busy roaring to offer anything resembling speech. One final blow broke his jaw, and then he was free, alighting upon the ruined soil below. You know, he reached up, pulling a tiring teeth free from his shoulder. I was trying to be nice. A baleful red eye regarded him as he cast it aside. Clearly, kindness is wasted on you. Now was the blonde's turn to change. Naruto didn't simply gain height. Even in his agony, the god of light recognized that, because he became something else entirely. Rather, something else rose around him to carry him with it, flinging him into the air as a body grew around him. For a moment, just a moment, the wounded deity glimpsed a mighty golden kitsune looming over him, fresh, healthy, utterly unhurt. Unlike him. Oh! He had a moment to blink up at the behemoth he had unleashed. I have blundered. Yes, the universe agreed wholeheartedly, and now you reap the whirlwind. His world vanished in a haze of pain. The monster with many tails knew no mercy. It gripped the god of light by the horns and smashed his ruined face down into the ground. Broken and bleeding, he fought back nevertheless, trying in vain to coil away with the callous eyes ease and pinned him, forced him to revert once more. So too did the boot stomp down on God's skull again, now with 10 times the force of before, and just like that, he found himself face to face with the mortal once more. You done now? Nothing left in the tank? Nothing more to say? His adversary scoffed, grinding an armored heel into the god's visage. That's all right. I'll do the talking. Now you may be thinking, if I can devour gods, why not take some of your power too? Surely having that would only help lift the curse, right? His armored boot ground down further, fracturing the god's face. Well, the answer might surprise you. Naruto leaned closer, pressing his forehead to that of the fallen deity. Lips brushed what passed for being ears. I already have. The god of light balked. Lies, surely. That was impossible. When? How? He would have felt such a thing, but he was already so diminished, weakened by the last blast. He had no way of asserting the truth, of knowing whether the rotten jerkin had truly weakened him this much, or if something had truly stolen from him. Had it been during that brief battle? It couldn't be, could it? Salem may not be strong enough to banish you from this world, but me? Pearling white teeth flashed at him in a ghastly grin as he leaned back. After that little dip a few decades ago, I'm stronger than I've ever been. Unfortunately for you, I'm not as nice as I used to be. And now? A hand rose, bathed in golden light, fingers splayed. Memories or not, it doesn't take much to see you for who you are. The god recoiled, still clutching a ruined limb to his chest. And what am I? A parasite. I've dealt with those before, too. The mortal continued to talk almost amicably, even as that lone palm began to swirl with eerie light. Could light be black? Orochimaru, Madara, Kaguya. You may think you're special, but to me, Blue Eyes bled red, you're just a big fish trapped in a small pond. Now the other hand rose to cup it, building the blaze in his hand once more. You don't even realize there's a whole ocean out there, filled with other fish, and there are sharks in deeper waters. Is that what you claim to be? Answer that question yourself. Pearly white, the teeth flashed in the storm. You and your brother can send your armies at us. His voice rose as the wind picked up, straining to be heard in the coming darkness. Send your proxies, send your servants, send your followers. I will save her. A manic light burned in his eyes, but you won't be here to see it. I may not be able to kill you, but I can kick you off this planet. Blue eyes flashed into crimson once more as the giant fox roared over him once more. Naruto's smile turned vicious. Now get the hell off my lawn! As the tailed beast bomb burned his world red and banished him from the face of Remnant, so too did the God of Light hear his brother's laughter. It was a deep, throating sound, one that filled him with shame. Bested by a mortal, he'd never hear the end of this. He just knew it. There would be vengeance for this light, so he swore. Naruto watched the last of the god dissolved before his very eyes. Was this a victory? It felt like a victory. Even now he half expected one last-ditch attack, some final curse flung at him as he departed. None came, and the skies began to clear. Settled it, then. Not only had the god of light been bested, but they'd weakened him so badly that he'd become incorporeal once more. He wouldn't soon return, assuming he could at all. A pleasant feeling burned through his chest as he massaged his wounded shoulder. Damn thing would probably scar. Well worth it. He'll be back, you know, Kurama warned. He strikes me as the sort to hold a grudge. Naruto stooped down to retrieve his staff. Come hell or high water, we'll be ready. They'd have to be. Gods were petty, and while he had yet to meet the god of darkness, well, he didn't much relish the idea of facing two gods at once. It was a fight he was sure he could win, but he wouldn't put it past them to stack the deck in their favor the next time they met. And there would be a next time. There would be no doubt about that. Bastards, they wouldn't catch him unprepared. Oh, I'm sure we'll be prepared. His partner laughed suddenly. But are you ready for Salem's reaction? He felt someone drilling a hole into his back. His spine stiffened. She's right behind me, isn't she? Yep, the fox answered with a smirk. That'd be her. How long has she been watching? Only the last 2 minutes, meaning she saw. Ugh. And Naruto didn't want to turn around. He really truly didn't. If only because he wasn't sure what he would find there. Shock, joy, fear. His legs felt like blocks of lead, but he forced himself to turn, even as his mind whirled wildly. Chin up now. Hold your head high. You haven't done anything wrong here. If anything, she should be happy, right? Uncertainly clawed at him. He came full circle. Salem indeed waited for him when she turned around. You beat him. Her voice was barely a whisper. She balked at him, eyes wide, lips forming a small round oval of surprise. Her eyes traveled up to the fading light, then snapped back to him. She looked like she'd only just woken from her nap. Even now he saw her there, standing on the porch. Wait! Standing no longer, without warning, she started forward, tearing down the steps in her haste. She absolutely blitzed him, and he had half an instant to glimpse the familiar emotion in her eyes before she was on him, not with anger or fear, as he'd expected, but something else altogether, an emotion he recognized all too well. Oh dear, that looked like Salem crashed into him, knocking him back half a pace with the sheer intensity of her tackle. Her hands clamped down on his face, firmly locking him in place for a moment. Her eyes seemed to pulse with living flames, trailing invisible tongues of fire at the edge before she could calm down. And then those pale palms whisked down over his chest and shoulder to inspect his wounds. All the while her mouth worked wordlessly, unable to form the words she so desperately wanted to say. So he said them for her. I'm alive. He croaked the words, reaching up to cup her cheek. I won. Those 4 words must have unburdened Salem, because red eyes flashed, and she made a noise somewhere between a gasp and a sob, tears burning in her black depths. He knew she was too stubborn to let them fall while he could see. When her tongue failed her again, she settled for a less audible mean of communication. Her kiss stole his breath away and left him reeling. You wonderful, wonderful man! Wow! His smile rebooted. Salem kissed him fiercely. Previews. He is the last reason for me to tolerate human life. You will not touch him. You will not harm him. For if you do, your world will burn. Luna! The great wolf perked up, a finger jabbed forward. Sick 'em! As time passed, humanity returned, but gods don't take defeat lightly. They are spiteful, petty creatures, petty indeed. Never leave me. I want to start a family with you. This is all your fault, you know, huh? Naruto coughed obviously. Me? Look what you did, she cried. Take responsibility. Ozma, is that really you? How? She didn't see Naruto's smile crack behind her back. Ozma saw him and his smile did the same, fracturing ever so slightly. End of chapter 2.